Welcome to Plan Today. Today is October 27th, 2012, and I am going to be comparing the iPad mini versus the Nexus 7 versus the 7-inch Kindle Fire HD in this video. This is going to be mostly in terms of specs and features, and I'm hoping to get through everything for you, as well as pricing actually, and models and availability towards the end of this video. So let's get started. So iPad mini will be available from only iOS 6. The Nexus 7 will be powered by Android version 4.1 Jelly Bean, and the Kindle Fire HD comes in at Android 4.0 Ice Cream Sandwich. Of course, it's a heavily modified version, so it doesn't even look like Android. In terms of the display, the iPad mini will be a 7.9-inch display with LED backlight, IPS, and it has a PPI of 163, whereas the Nexus 7 is a 7-inch display, an IPS display, and it has a PPI of 216. So if you're looking for the best display, I would definitely recommend opting for the Nexus 7. And the Amazon Kindle Fire HD is also a good option. It comes in a 7-inch. It's an LCD IPS, 216 ppi, so on par with the Nexus 7. The resolution for the iPad mini is 1024 by 768, the Nexus 7 1280 by 800, and the Kindle Fire is the same thing, 1280 by 800. In terms of processor, this is where the iPad mini kind of goes down a bit. It's a dual-core A5 processor versus the Nexus 7 with a quad-core NVIDIA Tegra 3 processor clocked at 1.2 GHz, and the Kindle Fire HD has a dual-core 1.2 GHz TI OMAP 4460 processor. So in terms of speed, you'd probably want to go for the Nexus 7. However, the iPad mini is a really smooth device, and iOS 6 runs perfectly with a dual-core A5 processor. But when it comes to using apps, that's when the iPad mini may be a bit restricted. But the Nexus 7 with Android Jelly Bean and all the smoothness is great as well. I forgot they call it, I think, Project Butter, but that keeps the UI very fast, very responsive, and fluid. So it kind of, I would, in terms of speed, of course, I would recommend the Nexus 7 because it is a quad core versus the dual core A5. In terms of memory, the iPad mini will be 512 megabytes. The Nexus 7 is 1 gig, and the Kindle Fire is also 1 gigabyte of RAM. In terms of storage, the iPad mini will be available in 16, 32, and 64 gigabyte models. The Nexus 7 will be available in 8 or 16 gigabyte, and the Kindle Fire HD will be 16 or 32 gigabyte variant. So if you want storage, if you want a really large storage space, I would definitely recommend going for the iPad mini, considering that the Nexus 7 doesn't really have a micro SD slot. Yeah, it doesn't have a micro SD slot. In terms of port, the iPad mini has a lightning connector, a 3.5mm headphone jack, but that's pretty much it. The Nexus 7 has a micro USB and also a 3.5mm headphone jack, so it's kind of on par. Whereas the Kindle Fire HD has a micro SD slot, a micro HDMI, and a 3.5mm headphone jack. So that's really nice. And they're really supporting a whole range of formats there. So even if you get the 16 gigabyte of the Kindle Fire, you can upgrade it using micro SD, and therefore I give the upper hand in terms of storage in general to the Kindle Fire HD, because the iPad mini, you're going to be paying a lot. I believe it's $629 for the 64 gigabyte model, but I'll go over pricing towards the end of this video. In terms of front-facing camera, the iPad mini has a FaceTime HD camera, Nexus 7 is a 1.2 megapixel camera, and the Kindle Fire HD is an HD camera, front-facing camera. The iPad mini has a 5 megapixel rear-facing 1080p video camera, whereas the Nexus 7 and the Kindle Fire don't even have a rear-facing camera. So if you want something that takes good pictures front and back, I would recommend going with the iPad mini, because none of the other options actually have a rear-facing camera, and the FaceTime HD camera is well known, proven, and it really works. So why not just go for the iPad mini if you're looking for camera? In terms of cellular radio, the iPad mini has an option for LTE, whereas the Nexus 7 and the Kindle don't have an option at all. The Wi-Fi on the iPad mini is 802.11 BGNN, actually a BGNN. The Nexus 7 is just a 802.11 BGNN, and the Kindle Fire HD is the same as the iPad, 802.11 ABGNN. In terms of Bluetooth, the iPad mini is a 4.0. Both of the Nexus 7 and the Kindle Fire come in at only Bluetooth 3.0. They all have accelerometers, gyroscopes, and in terms of battery life, Apple has just announced that the battery is going to last 10 hours. We don't know the exact size of the battery, but the Nexus 7 has a battery life of, actually has a battery battery capacity of 4,325 milliamp hours, and the Kindle Fire HD has 4,400 milliamp hour. In terms of battery life in general, I would expect the iPad mini to last the longest with its 10-hour battery life. Maybe the Nexus 7 you might be able to squeeze out 8 hours, and the Kindle Fire maybe around 9 hours, but I still think the iPad mini will be fully optimized for battery. So if you want long lasting, you would go for the iPad mini. And remember that I'll give my final opinion on which device you should get at the end of this video and narrow it down for you as much as I can. So in terms of thickness and dimensions, the iPad mini weighs in at 308 grams versus Nexus 7 340, and the Kindle Fire is 395. So iPad mini is the lightest, and it's also the thinnest actually. The iPad mini is 7.2 millimeters, whereas the Nexus 7 is 10.45 millimeters, and the Kindle Fire HD is just under that, 10.3 millimeters. And finally, in terms of pricing, so if you've been waiting and watching this video until now, thank you for watching, definitely. But let me go over some pricing and what models you'll be getting. So there's quite a few iPad mini models, so I'm going to try to break it down as much as I can for you. So for $329, you'll be able to get the 16 gigabyte Wi-Fi model. For $459, you'll be able to get the 16 gigabyte LTE model. For $429, you'll be able to get the 32 gigabyte Wi-Fi only. And for $559, you'll be able to get the 32 gigabyte LTE. For $515, you'll be able to get the 64 gigabyte Wi-Fi only, and for $659 you'll be able to get the 64 gigabyte with LTE. So as you can see, the base price for that, just not including cellular, just the Wi-Fi, is $329. The Nexus 7 on the other hand, is the lowest price is $199, but that's only 8 gigs. So if you want to compare the iPad and the Nexus 7, you would have to use the 16 gigabyte models. For the Nexus 7, that's actually $249 versus the $329 on the iPad mini. So the Nexus 7 is actually really cheap, but the Kindle Fire actually comes in at only $199 for the 16 gigabyte Wi-Fi only model, and that makes it the cheapest device of the three. And it has a 32 gigabyte model as well, don't forget about that, and that comes in at $249. Keep in mind that with the Kindle Fire you get a lot of special offers directly from Amazon as well, so you have to keep that in mind when you're factoring in pricing. So in terms of pricing, the cheapest is the Kindle Fire, next up would be the Nexus 7, and then of course the highest price is the iPad mini. Availability, the iPad mini will be available on November 2nd, 2012. That's the Wi-Fi version, and I believe the cellular version will follow a couple weeks after, sometime in December I believe, 2012, whereas the Nexus 7 and the Kindle Fire as of today, October 27th, is officially available. So yeah, that's it for this video. Let me know what you guys think about which device wins out of these three, or just let me know your thoughts on the three. You don't necessarily have to give me a specific device, because I'm not going to do that. Let me narrow it down actually for you right now. So there's three devices: the iPad mini, the Nexus 7, and the 7-inch Kindle Fire HD. Out of which device you should get, I think you should narrow it down to the Nexus 7 and the iPad mini. That's just my opinion. I believe those are the two better devices of the three. And between the two, the iPad mini and the Nexus 7, it's actually a tough option. If you're thinking about pricing, then of course you would go for the Nexus 7, because the iPad mini is actually really high priced, and it's actually approaching the iPad 9.7 inch, the 4th gen or the 3rd gen iPad's pricing range, which is $499. This one's $329, so it's not significant. It's actually not even significantly less than the larger screen model. So I would recommend not getting the iPad mini at all unless you really want that small 7-inch 7.9 inch display. I would recommend forking over the extra $170 and getting the larger inch iPad if you're fine with the display size, because the internals are so much better on the larger inch iPad, whereas the iPad mini is actually really low cost. And I guess that's how Apple kind of integrated that high 10-hour battery. And also the price went through the roof as well. $329 is a lot to pay for a 7.9 inch tablet when you have the Nexus 7 as a possible option, as well as a Kindle Fire actually. So anyways, that's just my opinion. That's what I think. So basically I kind of concluded that the Nexus 7 would be the device to go out of these three. But if you're considering the iPad mini, I would say fork over the extra $170, upgrade to the iPad 4th generation, which if you don't know about, you can check out that video over at my channel. I have coverage on that as well. So definitely subscribe to Play Infinite if you want to know more about all these devices, the Nexus 7, the following Google Nexus tablets, the Nexus 10, which is actually rumored. I'm making a video on that, so you can check that out as well. I'll do my continuous coverage on the Apple products, the iPad mini, the MacBook, the iMac. You can check out all my videos on those over at my channel. But for now, that's it. So definitely subscribe to Play Infinite if you haven't already, and let me know what you guys think is the best option out of the three. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Peace.